Alright, we are back with a new video, and we are now just a few days away from the new season of Survivor South Africa, and it is now time to do my preseason power ranking for this season. Now, I want to wait until after the RHAP interviews to really solidify my thoughts on these players coming into this season, and for the most part, I am pretty excited with this cast, as I talked about in previous videos. It should be interesting to see how all these players coming back really change it up this time around. And I think there were some interesting things that came out in these interviews, but now it's time to really see what I think about these players coming into it. So there are 20 players to rank here, and let's just get right into the video. So starting off at number 20, the player I believe is the least likely to win the game, based on what we know right now, is Tanya from Island of Secrets. And for me, it was a debate between Tanya and a few other people who I feel like don't have that much potential within the game. But the thing that separates Tanya from me is a couple things. One, I wasn't really impressed by her interview. I mean, she talks a lot about how she didn't watch her season as it was airing. She says how she doesn't want to play with Meral or Dante, two people who are on the cast, but granted are on different starting tribes, but that's not particularly great. Also, she's on a starting tribe with Felix, someone she had a rivalry with on her original season. And while she did get the better of Felix in that regard, she didn't last too much longer beyond that. And beyond that, I don't feel super confident on her as a player. I'm not too sure she'll really change it up. And considering how lackluster she played on her original season, that doesn't really bode well for her chances moving forward for me. But I mean, there is a possibility she can make it decently far, but based on everything we know right now, I'm not feeling too great about her, and because of that, she is here at number 20. Now moving on to number 19, we have a player who I feel pretty similar about compared to Tanya in that I don't feel too great about them as a player, but they do seem to be in a slightly better position coming into it. But here we have Pinet from Immunity Island, and similar to Tanya, I don't think Pinet played particularly well on her original season. I feel like she was a very early boot due to her being confrontational, and she does talk about that in her RJP interview. However, I do worry that she could go a bit too far in the opposite direction and being too passive to the point to where she isn't really positioning herself super well. So that does give me some concerns for her coming into it. But the main reason I have her above Tanya is that she does seem to have some more natural allies coming into it. She talks about in her interview how she wants to play with Dino. Dino is someone on her starting tribe. She's also going to be with Teresa, someone else from her season. So I feel like coming into it, Pinet does have some more people that she could naturally connect with, namely people from her original season, whereas Tanya doesn't seem to have too many people on her side and literally has someone that she was a literal rival to on her original season. Pinet at least has people that she could connect with on a game level, but it's still not looking great for her. I don't feel too confident about her as a player, so because of that, she's here at number 19. Now moving on to number 18, we have another player who I don't feel too great about coming into it, and we actually have the first post-merger on the list, and here we have Dante from Island of Secrets. Now admittedly, I feel like Dante could do alright coming into it, in the sense that he is a relatively big physical guy. He's also someone who has some people that he could align with. I mean, we know Marion talked about wanting to work with him. There's also people similar to his archetype on his tribe, particularly Chappies. So there are definitely avenues for him to do well early on. However, I do feel like he will ultimately be targeted at the end of the day. And plus, I didn't get the greatest sense from his interview either. I mean, he does talk about how he focused too much on the survival aspect the last time and how he was a bit introverted, but I'm not feeling too great about his ability to really ramp it up and really improve upon his game from the last time. However, he does have that aspect of people wanting to work with him that does give me a bit more confidence in him, but I still can't see him being a frontrunner coming into it. But who knows, I could be proven wrong. But for right now, I figured 18 is about as high as I can put him. Now we're moving on to number 17, and I kind of can't believe this person is this high considering how poorly they played their last time, but I feel like their interview did exude some confidence, but I'm still very skeptical. But here we have Teresa from Immunity Island, and admittedly when I first heard that Teresa was going to be on the cast, I was kind of expecting her to be towards the bottom. I mean, she played a very rocky game on Immunity Island, and considering how that was the most recent season, I was very skeptical about how she was going to be able to change from her last time. And admittedly, I still have a lot of those concerns. I mean, I feel like her best case scenario is someone like a Pinty, someone who recognizes their flaws from the last time and maybe tries to overcorrect by not really doing as much, maybe not being as active this time, and in turn, not really positioning herself super well. However, the main reason I have her a few spots higher is her RHAP interview, where I feel like she definitely came off as a super fan that she is. She was very excited coming into it. She does admit that she didn't really pregame, but she did say that she was going to have a more relaxed approach coming in. She says she wants to improve her social game. So that was something at least. But at the end of the day, I felt good about Teresa last time watching her RGB interview, and we all saw how that turned out. So I still have a number of question marks regarding Teresa, but her interview was enough to make her a few spots higher on this list. So because of that, she is here at number 17. Now I'm moving on to number 16, and we have another player who I don't feel the greatest about, and here we have Felix from Island of Secrets. And similar to these last couple of players, Felix isn't the greatest player in the world. I mean, he didn't have the best run last time. He was a bit of a domineering force and someone who didn't really gel well with his swap tribe to where he was ultimately taken out there. Now, similar to Tanya, he will be on a starting tribe with someone who was against him for a lot of his run, which isn't particularly great. And while I don't think that'll play as big of a factor this time, I mean, he wasn't the greatest player to begin with. Now, he does talk in his interview about how he realizes he was a bit too much last time and how he'll try to tone it down, but he doesn't really get into too specific detail over how he's going to do that. And considering how Island of Secrets is one of the more recent seasons on the board, I'm not too confident in terms of how different he will be this time and whether he'll be able to translate that into a strong game. Now, he could make it a decent bit further. I'm not saying he's necessarily going to be an early boot. However, he's not someone who I feel too confident about. So because of that, he is here at number 16. Now we're moving on to number 15, and we are jumping back to the post-mergers. And we actually have one of the highest place finishers from their last time, which is strange considering how low they are on the list. But here we have Steffi. Now, I don't think Steffi's necessarily going to be an early boot per se. Now, she did obviously play on Island of Secrets and got all the way to the final 5 there. However, she really wasn't really set up well to win that season, even if she did get to the end. And she wasn't really the biggest player on that season anyway. Now, she does talk a bit about how she isn't as strong physically as she was the first time, but I still think she'll be alright in challenges early on. She talks about how she was too loyal in our RGP interview and how she wasn't really as emotionally vulnerable as she was trying to be. That's really something that she's talking about trying to change this time, which is okay, I guess, but I'm not really getting the sense that she's really going to change too much up to where she's going to be this great player at the end of the day. Now, as I said, I think she could make it decently far as well, although she could also be a target depending on how much players take into account previous people's games, and considering Steffi is one of the highest placed finishers from her original season, I mean, that could work against her as well. But even outside of that, I mean, she definitely could do well, but I don't feel like she has changed too much to where I feel she'll be this top contender. So because of that, I do have to leave her here at number 15. Now we're moving on to number 14. And again, we are sticking with the post-mergers. And we actually have the highest place finisher from his original season. And here we have Chappies. And Chappies is weird because on one hand, I do worry for him quite a bit. I mean, he is the highest place finisher. He came the closest to winning out of anyone here, literally in third place, one immunity challenge away from possibly winning the game. And he played on the most recent season, so he will definitely be on the top of people's minds. And sure enough, there were multiple people that talked about him in their RHAP interviews. Now, granted, not all of them talked about targeting him per se. I mean, we know people like PK talked about wanting to work with him. People like a Steffi talked about wanting to work with him as well. I mean, even a Dante is open to working with him as well. But then he also has people like Shane, who actively says he doesn't want to play with Chappies. Even beyond that, I mean, the fact that he is someone that was just on the most recent season, someone who is a massive character, I do worry about him being a target early on. And if they do go to an early tribal council, I could definitely see him being in consideration to be voted out. However, the main reason I have him as high as he is again, I feel like he is someone who could be underestimated still. I mean, he is someone who says that he wants to have more fun this time, definitely someone who's going to be a bit more laid back. So that is something that could work in his favor per se. but just those concerns about him being an early target that do lead me to leave him here at number 14. Now we're moving on to number 13, and we have a player who's kind of similar to Chappies in that they're a pretty big name and could be an early target based on that reputation, but I do have a bit more confidence in this person to fly a bit more under the radar. But here we have Palesa from Survivor Philippines, and the thing about Palesa is she definitely isn't going to be as forefront as someone like a Chappies who was literally on the last season. Palesa was someone who played a couple years ago at this point, but she is still a pretty big name, definitely one of the biggest names in Survivor South Africa, and I feel like that is definitely something that will precede her coming into the season. Now, whether that will translate to her being targeted early on does remain to be seen. Now, there is some encouragement in the sense that there are people that talk about wanting to play with her. Tanya talked about wanting to play with her. Also, a lot of people from her season said they want to play with her, people like a Toni, for instance. So there is some room for her to maneuver early on, and I do think that could definitely play into her favor. However, it's just a concern about her being a big target. Plus, I don't feel like she's the best player in the world either. I mean, she was definitely someone who was very erratic early on. She talks about in her interview how she was very much someone who was nervous about social interactions and someone that very much had to rely on her instincts the last time, which led to some fun moments like her playing the idol at Tribal Council, but again, doesn't really lead to her being the best player in the world. So I do think those are things that are working against her, but it's the fact that she does at least have people that want to work with her, and plus no one actively says in their interview that they don't want to play with her. That does lead me to put her here a bit higher, but still the concerns about her being targeted that do lead me to put her here at number 13. Now I'm moving on to number 12, and I can see some people thinking this person is a bit too high, and to be fair, I don't feel super confident in this person actually winning the game, but I do have some confidence in them to make a decent run. But here we have Killarney from Survivor Champions, and Killarney is definitely someone who I think could get through a lot of those early rounds. She is pretty good physically, and she does talk a lot about how she's really focused this time. Now, granted, I do gravitate towards players who say that they are a bit more relaxed this time, and the fact that she does talk a lot about how she's going to be really taking this seriously is not the best sign in the world for me, especially since she was a pre-merger. Now, I do think something working in her favor is the fact that, again, she has played on Survivor Champions over 8 years ago, so she definitely had a lot of time to really grow, and she does talk in her interview about how she's went through a lot of changes in her life, and those are definitely things that have grounded her to a degree. So I am willing to give her the benefit of the doubt to a degree in that regard. I mean, we could see her be a very different player this time around. However, I also don't get the sense that she's really going to be that great strategically at the end of the day. And while I do feel like she will be doing well early on, I feel like a lot of that does stem from her physicality. However, that does bode well for her in the pre-merge. It doesn't really translate well into the post-merge. But then again, I mean, the fact that she did play so long ago could make her a bit of a wild card. So because of that, I do have her a bit higher at number 12. Now we're moving on to number 11. And similar to Killarney, we have another potential wild card here. And here we have Phil from Survivor Champions. Again, similar to Killarney, he played a really long time ago at this point, and I feel like he's definitely someone who probably has grown a lot since that time. I mean, he definitely talks about how his life has changed a lot since the last time he played, and I do get the sense that he's definitely going to change things up. I mean, he does say he wants to ride the wave, but once things break down, play more individually, says he wants to control his emotions better than he did last time. And again, considering the amount of time it's been, I do have slightly more confidence in his ability to do so. And he does say that he wants to play with Shane and Marion. Granted, players that are on different tribe than him starting out, but players that are from his season. And I feel like Phil is someone who's definitely going to embrace the strategic game more so than a Killarney, which is part of the reason why he's above Killarney per se. However, there are still enough question marks with, again, how well and how effective he'll be that do lead me to put him here at number 11. Now we're moving on to number 10, and we have a player who I definitely think could make another deep run. However, I do question how effective they'll be this time. And here we have PK from Survivor Philippines. Now, admittedly, PK was a pretty crazy player on his original season. He admits he never seen the show before, which did lead to him making some pretty insane decisions, like him flipping on Tevin in the post-swap, so there's that to consider. And he does talk about how he's definitely caught up since the last time he's played. He's definitely more familiar with the show, and he says that he wants to play like more strategically this time. Now, I do have some question marks over how effective he'll truly be. I mean, whether he will be a better strategic thinker this time, which does give me some concern about his win equity. And plus, he says he doesn't want to play with Marion as they are exes. And considering they are in the same starting tribe, I feel like that could lead to some drama early on. I mean, who knows per se. However, the main reason I have him this high is I still think he'll be somewhat effective. I still feel like he'll have some potential early on. And plus, the other factor is he wants to play with people like Chappies and Palesa, people that he feels good about and people are on his starting tribe. He also has Toni there, someone he was closely aligned with on his season, is also going to be there. So I do think he'll somewhat be in a good position early on, with the exception of Marion. But if he's able to smooth things over with Marion, I think he'll definitely be somewhat effective. However, there are still some question marks over how effective he'll be strategically that do lead me to put him here at number 10. Now we're moving on to number 9, and we have someone who I literally just mentioned, and here we have Toni from Philippines. And Toni is an interesting player, as I feel like she is someone who was definitely a bit emotional at points during her original season, but was in a strong position for a lot of that pre-merge, and at the post-merge she just simply got outnumbered there. So I feel like through that she definitely has some potential early on. And her interview wasn't the greatest per se, but again, I still feel like she is someone who may not be taken super seriously, which definitely could play into her favor per se. Now, another thing that's going into her favor is the fact that she's coming into the season with a number of allies. I mean, she's coming in with both PK and Tevin, two people from her original season, two people that she says that she wants to play with. And she's also been involved in a lot of the Survivor community ever since her original season. So I feel like those are definitely things that could play into her favor coming into it. However, again, it could also lead to her being targeted early on, and I'm not too sure how much she'll be able to correct a lot of her emotional gameplay at points that did lead to her downfall, and again, could lead to her perception not being taken super seriously. So I definitely think Toni is someone who could go either way, which does lead me to put her here at number 9. Now we're moving on to number 8, and we have another player who I mentioned not too long ago, and here we have Tevin, also from Philippines. And Tevin is in an interesting spot coming into the season. I mean, again, he is coming into the season with other people from his season, namely PK and Toni. Granted, they are on different tribes from him, but they also talked about wanting to work with him, and he himself said that he wanted to work with PK and Toni. So I feel like that's something that could work out in his favor. He's also one of the bigger names on this pre-merge tribe, where he was obviously a pretty big player on that season. He was a super fan, and he was ultimately blindsided at the post swap due to some pretty weird gameplay from PK, but it is what it is. Now, he does talk quite a bit about how he wants to be a bit more relaxed this season, how he wants to be sort of a comedian for his tribe, and he views his blindside as a source of improvement, and how he's now able to detect cues that foretell a future blindside. So I feel like that is something that could work out in his favor. Now, where I do worry for him a bit is the fact that he's on a tribe with Dino, like someone who, again, sort of fits a similar mold to him in terms of him being a super fan and also him being a bit more relaxed coming into the season. I know Phil is another person who sort of fits that mold as well. So I do wonder where Tevin will fit in with all that, where someone like a Dino could very well be an ally for him, but could also be targeted early on by someone like a Dino in order to like take up that space per se as being this nerdy super fan per se. So I do worry a bit for Tevin in that regard. And plus, I feel like he's a bit more prominent as a figure and maybe taken a bit more seriously compared to a lot of these other pre-merge players. So there's that to consider. But I still think Tevin is a pretty good player at the end of the day, and I wouldn't be surprised if he does pretty well here. So because of that, I do have him here at number 8. Now we're moving on to number 7, and we have one of the bigger players to talk about. And here we have Shane from Survivor Champions. And I feel pretty good about Shane coming into it. I do think he was one of the bigger players, especially for his time, and now he's coming back, and I feel like he will bring a lot of his strategic acumen to this game. He does talk a bit about wanting to be more nice this time, despite being pretty devious the last time. And given how long it's been, I do think he's probably gained some more life experience since then, so I think that could definitely play into his favor. He's also coming with Marion, someone he was very closely aligned with on his original season, and he does intend to align with her, and she has reciprocated some of the similar feelings. So I do think he will at least have one ally coming into it. Now, I do get a bit worried about some other people on his tribe, namely with Chappies. He says he doesn't want to play with Chappies. And in turn, we also have PK, who he says he doesn't want to play with Marion, one of his closer allies. So I do worry about his position earlier on. However, one thing that could definitely help him out is definitely people on the pre-merge tribe. I mean, there were a lot of pre-mergers that said that they wanted to play with him. Sheamus said he wanted to play with him. Phil said the same thing. Dino, Killarney, they all said they wanted to play with him. And if you were to get to a swap, like, he could definitely work with some of those people there. It's just a matter of getting through that early stage of the game. Now, to be fair, I do think he probably will have some success early on in the game. I mean, there's definitely potential for him to go out early, especially if him and Chappies get into a direct conflict early on. However, that concern is definitely a worry for me, which is a big reason that I do have to leave him here at number 7. Now we're moving on to number 6, and we literally have someone who I just mentioned, and here we have Marion, also for Survivor Champions. And I think Marion has a lot of the benefits that Shane has. Again, she is coming into the season with Shane, and she does very much want to work with him, so that's a benefit. And there are some people that do talk about working with her as well, namely a Phil, but also a Killarney to a degree. So I do think she has some potential allies coming into the season, but also if she is able to make it to a swap. Now, her one downside is, again, Chappies and PK. Not so much Chappies, but more so PK, someone that explicitly said that he doesn't want to see out there, given that they dated at one point. So that is a bit of a worry for her. And obviously her connection with Shane could lead her to being an early target. However, I do think she has more upside to flying under the radar than someone like a Shane. And while that could be a downside in that she could be targeted early on to keep around Shane as a shield, I do think that if Shane were to be taken out due to him being overly domineering, I do think Marion could have some room to maneuver moving forward. So at the end of the day, I feel like both Shane and Marion are very capable players, and I wouldn't be surprised if at least one of them, or heck, even both of them, make deep runs on this season. However, if I had to pick which one is slightly more likely to do well on this season, I would say Marion. I do think Marion definitely has more potential to fly under the radar than someone like a Shane, which does lead me to have her one spot higher at number 6. Now we're moving on to number 5, and we are going back to the pre-merge now, and we definitely have someone with a bit more potential than a lot of the other pre-mergers, but here we have Shona from Survivor Champions, and I think Shona definitely has a lot of potential coming into the season. I mean, she obviously played a while back, almost a decade ago, and she was pretty young at the time of her first season. She was only 24, I believe, and now she's 32, so she definitely is a bit older now. Definitely has some more life experience. I could definitely lead to a pretty successful run here. She obviously has built some connections, admittedly not as many as certain other people, but she does say that she wants to play with Dino. And I do think she'll be a pretty dynamic player in this season, and I feel like that's definitely something that could be rewarded with her on the season. Now, admittedly, there are some other people I feel a bit more confident about coming in, and plus I do worry a bit that she could overplay, but I do think she is one of the more set up pre-mergers to do well here, which is why she's here at number 5. Now we're moving on to number 4, and we're jumping back to the post-merge now, and this is a player I'm very excited to see on the season. We'll definitely see how they'll do, but here we have Taijon from Survivor Maldives, and he obviously has the biggest layoff out of anyone here. Literally been 11 years since he last played on Maldives, and obviously a lot has changed for him. I mean, at the end of the day, he is still a very capable player. In fact, at the time of Maldives, he was a very dynamic player, and he was definitely one of the bigger super fans on the show. He's kept up in the show since then. He's played some orgs, he's been involved in some charity events, and he's definitely done his work preparing for a return here. And I do feel like he has a lot of potential coming into the season. He says that he wants to play with Toni. I mean, he says that he doesn't want to rush his way into building alliances. He wants to act like a chameleon. I do have a lot of faith in Taijon to understand the strategy of the game, and I do think, considering how long it's been since he's played, I mean, I do think that could lead to him being a lesser target at the end of the day. I mean, I don't think a lot of people are super familiar with the way that he played the first time. I mean, literally on the RHAP interview, they literally had to summarize his game, given how he is from a season that, people aren't super familiar with. So I do think that's definitely something that could play to his favor. Not obviously could be a double-edged sword in that he arguably isn't as well connected. I mean, despite him being involved in a lot of the superfan community, I mean, he is the only person from his season to be on this cast here, which could definitely be a downside, but I also think could be that upside as well. So I think there are definitely elements that could go either way for Taijon. However, I still have a lot of confidence in him to adapt well to the modern game. He is definitely someone who will be prepared to deal with the strategy of the game. And plus, I think he'll be good enough physically to where he'll definitely carry his weight early on. So Taijon is definitely someone I'm looking out for, and definitely someone I think has some potential coming into this game. However, it's just those question marks over how well connected he'll truly be, along with the fact that he has played in so long, that do lead me to put him here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and it's sort of crazy this person is this high, especially considering they were the first boot of their season. But here we have Sheamus from Survivor Philippines. And again, he was the first boot of his season, and the fact that I have him this high is a bit crazy to think about. But to be fair, I mean, despite him being the first boot, he was actually a pretty capable player in that season. I mean, he was able to build a pretty solid alliance on his starting tribe, a group that was able to even stick together after that first tribal, even going to rocks at the second tribal of the season. So the fact that he was able to build in a group that was that loyal to him is pretty impressive at the end of the day. And I do think that demonstrates quite a bit of potential for him coming in. And I also think, considering that he was booted so early and so little is known about his game, that he's going to be a pretty massive wild card coming into the season. Now, I know there's some concern about him potentially being another Francesca, like someone who could easily just be the first boot again. However, I don't really think that's going to be the case here. I mean, I don't think Sheamus is necessarily someone that someone will vote out right away per se. And considering that he's already on a tribe with other pre-mergers, I don't think like the fact that he is the first boot really stands out as much compared to someone like a Francesca. So I do think Sheamus could definitely work his way in. And based on what we saw from him, I mean, he definitely has potential. Plus, I was somewhat impressed by his RHAP interview where he talks about how he wants to be more reliable this time and definitely wants to improve his social game. So I do think there's a lot of positives coming into the season for Sheamus. However, the reason I don't have him as my winner pick is I do think there are still some question marks over his game. I mean, at the end of the day, he was still the first boot of the season, and there's a lot that we don't know about him as a player compared to a lot of other players that we've seen. So that question mark does lead me to put him a bit lower, but Sheamus is still someone I'm pretty excited to see play again. And because of that, he is here at number 3. Now we're moving on to number 2, and these top 2 are pretty clear for me. I feel like these are pretty solid picks in their own right. It's just a matter of the order. But at number 2, I did go with the person I have a bit more question marks with. But here we have Dino from Immunity Island. And the thing about Dino is he's definitely someone I think could do pretty well here. I mean, he is a super fan. I mean, and that led me to have him as my winner pick the last time he played. But obviously it didn't quite pan out the way that it did. Largely because, I mean, he had a hard time really building deep social bonds to where people were comfortable sharing information with him. And in turn, he definitely sketched a number of people out. And he talks about that in his interview and how he wants to take a more relaxed approach this time. He admits that he over-prepared and that in turn led into overplay per se. And he talks about how he did quite a bit of networking after the season, building bonds with a number of people. And I do think that carries over into some of the other people's interviews. I mean, we have a lot of the pre-merge people talking about wanting to work with Dino. There's obviously Pinet and Teresa, people from his season, but you also people like Shona who talks about wanting to play with him. So I do think he definitely did some work in this previous offseason to really connect well coming into this return here. And I do think those are things that bode well for Dino. I mean, I do think he could very well change his approach this time, despite him playing so recently. Now, I'd still have those question marks. I mean, again, he did come off as a bit sketchy at points, which does make me a bit concerned for him. And while he can definitely turn that around, I mean, until I see it, I mean, I feel like I'm not entirely sure I can 100% believe it. And plus, at the end of the day, he is still a pre-merge boot from his original season. So that does make me a bit concerned as well. Not to mention the fact that he will be on a tribe of other people within his archetype, namely a Tevin and even a Phil. So he might have to contend with that to a degree, whether that involves working with those people or potentially targeting them. I mean, there are definitely ways in which Dino could run into some adversity coming into this season, but he is still someone who, again, understands the game pretty well. I feel like he definitely could turn things around, and I think he is someone who is more than willing to reflect on how he did last time and might even take a more relaxed approach if that means being able to build better social bonds, which was his biggest weakness the first time. So I do think of the people that played more recently, Dino definitely has one of the more upsides for him doing well on the return. However, it's just the fact that we saw him like talking a lot about the strategy last time, only for him to struggle building bonds and really gaining much of a foothold the previous time. That does make me a little worried for him at the end of the day. So because of that, I can't quite have him as my winner pick, but I am still very intrigued to see how he'll do this time. So because of that, I do have him here at number 2. And now at number 1, the player I believe is the most likely to win Survivor SA Return of the Outcasts, and my winner pick for the season is Meral from Island of Secrets. And admittedly, I feel like Meral definitely has a lot of potential coming to the season. I mean, if you look at her last time, I mean, she definitely had a number of ways in which she could do well in the game. I mean, she seemed pretty good enough in all 3 aspects of the game. And while she eventually got into a bad position, I mean, at the merge being taken out, I still think she could do well coming into this season. And considering the fact that she is the merge boot, I mean, she definitely should be one of the lesser targets, even among the post-mergers here. So I definitely think that could work out in her favor. She's obviously going to be on the same tribe as Dante, someone she was very closely aligned with on her original season. And even looking at her RHAP interview, she definitely talks about how she wants to work more with the women this time. You know, she doesn't just want to work with meat shields, which admittedly working with meat shields could work out in her favor, although it could also set her up to be sniped out very early on. And she wants to work with people that are on her tribe. I mean, she talks about working with Marion and Steffi, 2 people that she will be on a starting tribe with. So I think those are definitely things that could work out in Meryl's favor. Now, I understand there is some worry about her potentially being an early boot. However, I think Meral definitely has a lot of confidence coming into this. I mean, she definitely seems like someone that can navigate around that early on situation. And if she is able to get to, say, the swap, particularly with her allies, I feel like she's definitely going to be in a prime position to do well. And plus, on top of that, I mean, if we look at previous All-Star seasons, I mean, Meral definitely fits into this mold of player that could do very well in those seasons. You know, sort of this player who definitely made it decently far on their first attempt, but wasn't really seen as a big player per se. And obviously, with this season having a number of big players, namely Palesa, Chappies, even Shane, I mean, those players are definitely ones who could be targeted over Meral early on. And I feel like that's definitely something that could play well into Meryl's wheelhouse there. And again, considering that she is a well-rounded player, I feel like she could definitely benefit from being overlooked for a lot of the season to where she could eventually emerge as this pretty big power player. So I definitely think Meral has a lot of upside coming into the season. Now, is her downside? I mean, yes, sure, certainly there is. But then again, I feel like a lot of these players have potential downside coming into the season. I just feel like of all the players, Meryl's definitely the one I could see doing well the most. And considering what we saw from them in their first season, I feel like they probably have one of the lesser downsides compared to other players who have upside coming into their future season. So I feel like because of that, I feel pretty confident about Meral coming into this. And because of that, I do have her labeled as my winner pick. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out with the channel. Now, obviously, the season does start this Monday, and it's going to be airing 4 episodes a week for whatever reason. But obviously, I will be doing these power rankings each week, you know, like updating them after every 4 episodes. So stay tuned for that. Obviously, Big Brother 24 is happening right now, so I'm doing power rankings for those as well. So stay tuned for that. Also, if you haven't already, please be sure to join my Discord server. I'll leave you a link for it in the description. Like, if you want to hear my thoughts on the season as it's happening in real time, I mean, it's sort of a fun place to hang out, or at least that's what I'm trying it to be. So that's definitely something there. But for now, that is the video. See ya.